wanted to share some insights on complexity. And I think more than anything else, I want to sort of pull back the edges a little bit on life and what's really going on in the world and why things are the way they are. Um, and so I'm going to dance across the heads of a whole bunch of pretty deep ideas. And obviously, I can't get into them too much. This is just sort of a lightweight exposure to this. But I was looking at the news the other day and I saw this in the comments and I copy pasted it and emailed it to myself so I'd remember to make a video about this. So someone typed this up and they made the fonts this way. They emphasized certain words by putting them in caps. And reading this, it takes time to write something. It takes a certain level of intelligence to organize arguments and process thoughts and convey those via words. And it's not something you would do unless obviously you cared. There's a certain threshold of concern that you have to surpass to care to write these things. But furthermore, you have to think that your ideas are worth sharing, right? I think that's the tagline for TED, the series of talks. I think it's ideas worth sharing. That's a good threshold. Before you open your mouth, you should really believe that what you have to say is worth hearing. Sometimes in conversations with children, for example, sometimes you scratch your head and you say, like, was that really worth sharing? But hopefully that doesn't happen too often as people grow up and they develop a filter for things that other folks might care about or might benefit from. So obviously this person felt like this was worth saying. Now, this person is not alone. This is just an example of something that's extremely common these days. And that is, so I mentioned I pulled this from a news article. So there are many news sites that now have the ability to make comments on the articles. And it's very interesting. I enjoy reading these things because it's a really good pulse on what people are thinking. Now, there is a bias because most people will not make comments. And so you have some sample error. It's not true that this is an accurate representation of what the majority think. If you read through, say, 100 comments, that's not an accurate lens necessarily on what everyone thinks. But that the value of this is counterweighted by the fact that it's been shown that in anonymous venues, people are more willing to speak their mind. And so on most sites, the handle of the person is not their real name. But even if it is, you don't know that person, and how would you even go find them, right? And it's not like this is your neighbor or your mother-in-law who's who and you could come back to. So there's no impact whatsoever on their life by writing whatever the heck they think. It's the only limitation is some kind of grander, what might someone I'll never meet think about me type of barrier. Or maybe I'm afraid of what the three-letter agencies might do. I don't want to get my house raided at 4 a.m. or get audited on my taxes because I said something against the government. But other than that, people speak their minds. And so it's terribly troubling to read these things in a sense, because you see just how unintelligent or motivated by baser things quote unquote normal people are. And maybe the scariest thing about it is this Dunning-Kruger effect, where people who just aren't that bright think they know everything there is to know about anything, or at least everything there is to know that matters. They think that whatever they understand is all that's worth understanding. And that's deeply troubling because we live in a complex world. And if you're a student of complexity, that will mean a lot more to you than if you're just thinking of that colloquially. But boiling it down to the basest elements, complexity is a measure of the unknown. And the world is the most complex system. Reality is the most complex system. Everything else is just a microcosm of that. It's a subset of that grand complexity. Okay, so not to wax too philosophical here, let's bring it back to the comment. So this person posted 3 examples of, I believe this was on an article whose topic was something like interest rates rising have not had an effect on inflation. So inflation's still raging even though interest rates are rising. All right, so what we have here is a complex problem, inflation, and a simple attempted solution, raise interest rates. Now, in the past, there's at least one example where Volcker jacked up the interest rate. I believe it went over 20%. Imagine that. And inflation subsided thereafter. So was that causal? Who knows? It's not the point of this video to figure out that mystery. However, the world rages on in complexity, and people stumble on in simplicity. Human nature is to be simple. But reality is not simple at all. And just because you choose not to discover or recognize or admit the complexity of situations, that doesn't spare you from the consequences that are coming for you, whether you like it or not. And so it behooves us to learn the game so that we can play the game. You need to learn what the rules are, and you need to learn what the structure is, and then you can strategize, right? So these examples provided by this poster were to support his argument or her argument that the greed of people or corporations in setting prices is the reason why inflation has not subsided. So this is very interesting because, for one, we don't have the ability to ask this poster what they think the cause of inflation was, which is also multifaceted. But they have reduced this complex problem down to a simple explanation. It's not a solution, but the explanation suggests a range of solutions, none of which will work, and most of which, if not all of which, will absolutely make it worse. And here's the problem, and we're going to go through these to give you a taste. Here's the problem, and it's interesting because it's a problem that's manifested in this ironic meta example. The only reason we have access to this person's thoughts is because you're watching me, some random guy on YouTube, and I read an article on a news site. And so we have a chain of, well, actually 3 levels at least, of ease of information. Let me explain that because it's very important. So this person, we'll call it a guy, this guy only knew about any of these things. He only thinks he's informed because he lives in a world where he has access to way more information than a person like him would ever have access to in the history of the world. So let's start there. So through no merit of his own, he has access to tons and tons and tons more information than way better people than him have ever had in the past. Where did that access come from? We could launch a long conversation here, but I'll just jump to the point. It came from oil. Oil is the reason that we have unmerited prosperity, so great unmerited prosperity today. It's not because humans are smarter than they used to be. It's not because we're more moral than we used to be. If anything, those two things are trending in the opposite direction. You can make a strong case for that. It's because of cheap oil. Okay, so let's just suppose that to be the case. Since I'm not arguing that in this video, we'll just suppose it's the case. Now, this guy has access to all this information, and it didn't come because of his merit, and he's not using it to increase his merit. What do I mean by that? You send a normal kid to public schools, they will come out more educated than people before mandated public education, but they will not come out smarter. On the average, they will come out dumber than someone who was raised in, say, 1824 on average in the United States. And you might say, well, how could that be? 12 years of compulsory education. Of course, they're going to learn how to read and write and how to do math, and they're going to be informed about things that matter. Maybe, but probably not. I just read an article the other day. I think there are 13 schools, high schools in Baltimore City, where I'm from, where there's not one student who can pass proficiency tests in math. Not one. And you might say, well, that's Baltimore. It's a cesspool. Well, guess what? You meet the average person graduating from high school today, they will be dumber, less able to think critically and make wise choices, less responsible, less prepared for life, less capable at life than a random person born in the United States 50 years ago. I will put every dollar I have on that argument. So, education is not intelligence. And I'm using the common sense of the word, going to school. So, anyway. So I know about what this person said because I was able to read the news, but I actually use what I read to inform myself and become more intelligent, which doesn't make me special. It's a capability that we all have. I just make use of it, right? Because I've invested a whole lot of time and effort into learning and addressing biases that we have as humans. I'm fighting that battle, and it's a continuous battle. And I'm learning things as I go. Every day I learn something. I learn many things. So now you know about this because I'm sharing it. And so all of us, all three of us in this present chain, we have access to unprecedented information. But the question is, what are we doing with it? Now, not all people are going to be able to reach a point where they can handle substantially more complexity than they otherwise could. So if you take a random person and you chuck them into a subsistence farming situation from birth, they will probably get to the point where they can produce enough food to eat and to support a family. In fact, statistically speaking, at least 85% of people would be able to do that. However, there will be some who fail at that through choice or capacity, and they will have to be cared for by others for their entire lives, about 15%. As you scale the complexity from subsistence farming, which is as simple as it gets, to the modern world, which is as complex as we know, what you'll find is that there's an exponential decrease in the capability of an average person to, we'll say, contend with that. But what I mean by that is to face those challenges in a way that they can support themselves and those they're responsible for. Now that's the baseline, caring for yourself and those in your family. Even rarer will be the person who is so capable of generating a surplus of such quantity in wisdom and the material gains that you encounter through exercising it, typically, obviously there are exceptions, that you have the capacity, the spare capacity, to help other people. This includes in governance, okay? Not necessarily government, but, anciently wise people would hang out at the gate of the city, and they didn't need to work for a living because they had sort of solved that problem. And they would stand there ready to help other people. And so someone would come up and they'd say, well, I'm facing this problem. What do you think I should do? Or this is my life so far. What do you think I could do better? And the person would say, well, it sounds to me like you might do this or you might do that. And there'd be other folks there in the gate, and they could just have a conversation with folks who had the at least appearance of being wiser. And you know what? Very often they got the key to the city, so to speak, and they jumped ahead in their lives by taking advantage of folks who had figured things out to a greater extent. Because complexity is never ending, and all of us will eventually be overcome. Okay? This is a fantastic argument for the need for God. However, there's a whole lot between those 2 points, and that's where we live today. So, in the modern world, we don't have a gate to the city. We don't have people who are there, and if they were there, they would not only not be recognized, they'd be denigrated, because the very attributes that belie wisdom, that demonstrate wisdom, that's a better way of saying it, are regarded by common people as negative. Okay? So this is, you call evil good and you call good evil, that's what this is. There's an inverted valuation once the differences become extreme enough. So if you met a good enough person, you would regard them as the epitome of evil. So, but we operate under the illusion of tremendous merit because we have such tremendous unmerited prosperity. Okay, so what does this have to do with anything? Well, if you look around today, the situation is that we've got governments and institutions with tremendous power compared to, I'll say influence. I don't like power. I don't think it's a very precise word. I think it's used to mean something other than what it actually means very often, but let's say influence. Where, for example, I worked at a university when COVID broke out, and there was an unnamed council of people, who knows who they were, and it was just a few of them, who got to make all the decisions regarding how the university handled COVID. They had an email address, but they didn't respond to it, and so there were this faceless, unaccountable cohort of people that got to decide some really serious things. And there was no accountability to the people that allegedly they were serving. Now, the government in any level today, in any developed nation, is not too different from that. Even at local, I live in the middle of nowhere in Montana. I think there are 10,000 people in the district that are state representative. So I'm talking about the state legislature. He's got a district of about 10,000 people. I can't get the guy to respond to an email. And it's not like I've harassed him or anything. I think he's been in office at least 8 years, and I've emailed him twice. And so I'd expect that I'd be able to get a reply to a reasonable email that shows that I'm a reasonable person. It's not like I'm saying, I hate you, therefore, or do this because I say so and whatever. It's just a serious question about, property taxes in this case. So if you can't even get a response from someone in basically the smallest district in the nation, how on earth do you think you're actually going to have any kind of feedback with a senator or a federal representative, let alone a president, let alone some bureaucrat? And the government's enormous now at every level. So how are you going to get a response? Well, at the same time, these same people are making decisions that have greater impact on your daily life on average than those in their position in the past. So when the federal government makes some arbitrary rule about water heaters and your water heater breaks, and now instead of looking at something that's going to cost you a couple $100, you're looking at something that's going to cost you a few thousand, that matters a lot. If the feds dictate that you're going to have to get an experimental medical treatment injected into your arm when there are existing treatments that might work just fine that preclude the legal use of an emergency use authorization, and then people start dropping dead, or they lock down the populace, and you lose your livelihood, or they start cranking out stimulus checks willy-nilly to random subsets of the population, things are going to change. The price of things is going to go crazy. Well, surprise. So what does this have to do with complexity? Because as the world gets more complex, or more accurately, it's always been complex, but as we engage with technologies and resources that cast us into greater complexity in the world, because subsistence farming is pretty cut and dry. As we scale up the complexity that we're affected by in life, we have to find people that are more capable of contending with that complexity well. So hopefully you're with me so far. We do not have that system today. We are about as far from it as we could be if someone intentionally, if the world's smartest people gathered together and intentionally crafted the worst possible approach to complexity, they would not be able to come up with something worse than what we have now, I think. I think they'd be hard-pressed to do a worse job. Okay? Boiling this down to one person, in this guy's comment, we see why. So, with that preamble, here's the 3 examples he gives. 1, gas prices versus barrel of oil. 2, price of eggs. 3, insurance, utilities, and rent. Now, I'm going to go through these things in a different order than he posted. I'm not even sure if we'll get to gas prices, but we'll see. Well, what the heck? Let's go in order. I'm feeling saucy. Let's go ahead and do it in order. Gas prices versus barrel of oil. So maybe you haven't even noticed. I would think that normal people would notice this, but from a survey I saw, normal people don't even know if they have LEDs or traditional light bulbs in their house. So maybe you didn't notice this, because normal people don't pay attention to things. So here we go. Maybe you've noticed that you could Google this. You could Google a chart of oil, price of a barrel of oil versus gas prices. And what you'll find is that in the quasi-recent run-up of gas prices to $5 plus a gallon, you'll find that this increase co-occurred with an increase in the price per barrel of oil. But the price per barrel of oil has dropped precipitously since then, but gas prices have not. Now, if you look at historic trends, you'll find that this has always occurred, that the pattern has been, if price per barrel of oil increases, then gas prices will increase. However, if barrel of oil prices decrease, gas prices do not necessarily decrease. Now, this person says the only possible explanation for this, I'm strengthening their conclusion a little, is that greedy corporations are charging windfall profits because they don't want to drop the price. Now, it takes approximately 2.3 seconds to Google the profitability of gas stations. So we'll start at the gas stations. Do gas stations make big profits? No, they do not. There's ups and there are downs. If you filter out all the downs and just focus on the ups, they would be profitable. However, they have to eat the losses when the prices go down, and the variability is high enough that it's basically a break even. Gas stations basically don't make any money. They make almost all of their profits on what they sell in the convenience stores that are frequently attached to them. I don't know if there's a gas station that doesn't have a convenience store, in fact, for this reason. Okay, so it's not local gas stations that are ripping you off. Maybe it's the corporations. Now you can look at this, and sure enough, companies like Exxon are immensely profitable, right? But if you dig into their numbers, it's not because they artificially increase the price of gas versus the price of oil. What you find is that there are a lot of factors in this equation. For example, and the guy even mentions they shut down refineries. It's the feds doing that. It's not the oil companies. You see, when the price goes up, they have every incentive in the world to open more refineries. If they don't, the only reason they wouldn't do that is because the feds are constantly threatening them to impose random and sudden constraints on their ability to operate those facilities. It's like a nuclear power plant. You don't open that to try to recoup your money in a year. The costs are so high and the risk is so high that this is going to take decades to recover your investment. And that's how it is with an oil refinery. And so, and then you have the cost of running those, which comes down to regulations as well from the government. And so it's not like it's this blue sky where, oh, the price of oil is high, let's drop a couple more wells in places we already know about and make some money. Or just increase as if it's a knob on a stereo. And when the price is high, we just turn this knob. And when the price is low, we turn it down, and it's that simple. No, it's massively complicated, right? And then trying to look in the crystal ball and say, oh, this is how much money we should outlay to discovery this year, next year, over the next decade, while the government's changing so quickly and the regulations they have and the market's changing so rapidly, that's an impossible tale to pin onto a donkey. There's massive loss, massive risk. And so when you get this windfall profit, that's great, but you have to subtract from it all the things that ended up costing you way more than you ever got out of it. And look to the future to say, how much of this do we want to invest in trying to prepare for the unknown that is yet to come? Okay, but that, I think, is not even the strongest explanation for this disconnect. It is that when prices go up, demand goes down. So as the price of gas increases, people say, I'm going to change my behavior so I use less fuel because I'm not paying that, or I can't pay that. But the cost benefit changes for people, and they say, you know, it's not worth driving into town to go out to eat. I mean, most people live in a town, but still, I'm not going to go burn another hour of fuel to go out to eat tonight. And in aggregate, those decisions, or I'm going to work from home more often over the next couple months. In aggregate, they make a huge difference in consumption. So what happens is the minute the price starts decreasing, people make changes in their behavior the other way, and they increase consumption. And so it dampens the reaction of the fuel cost from the drop in oil price. Does that make sense? Now, what I just explained over 5 or 10 minutes, it's not that hard to grasp, but you're not going to learn it in public school, or if it's taught to you, you're not going to pay attention, because it's much easier to point the finger at the boogeyman of corporations and say it's just greedy people. Well, people are greedy, not just people who run corporations. People who write these comments are greedy too. The average person is envious, greedy. They're wicked. It's human nature. It's evil. But the system, the complexity of the system, you have to understand this, because the evil of mankind is a constant. It's extraordinarily rare for an individual to overcome that, but it's always at the individual level. The only way to get a utopia is to pluck out all the people who haven't made that choice and transcended beyond it. You see? And that, by the way, is a key to understanding the end times, if you haven't figured that one out. Evil in humankind is a constant. And so, if something changes and you want to explain why, you don't point to that. That's never the reason, because it's always true. The system can change, but people don't change in aggregate. Individuals can change, but people do not change. Society does not change. Okay. Example 2. I like this one better. Price of eggs. Prior to, quote, COVID, they were around $1.40 a dozen. Then caps lock, for no reason. For no reason, in other words, this person sincerely believes that there was some conspiracy where everyone set the prices way higher for no reason. All at once. Which it's like the greatest marvel of human, what's the word I want to use here? Of working together as humanity. All of humanity came together for the price of setting eggs to $4.59 a dozen. It's like we could have had world peace with that kind of unity. We never achieved it before for good reasons, but man, if we can jack up the price of eggs $3 a dozen, we solve all the barriers of human unity. One fantastic tool for rooting out ridiculous ideas is to ask yourself, what kind of human coordination would be required to achieve what is claimed here? And there is no way that this happened, okay? If you want to convince me that two banking executives who are like second in command at the world's biggest banks, two of the world's biggest banks, colluded to set the price of gold, I'm totally willing to believe that. But, I don't even know how many people are in the supply chain for eggs, how many tens of thousands of people would have to come together at a secret meeting and 100% agree, and no one goes to the press, that we're going to set the price of eggs $3 a dozen higher than they were before. It's an absolutely absurd argument. Okay, continuing the comment. When people started getting their own chickens, prices mysteriously went down to $1.09 a dozen. All right, genius. Let's take 3 seconds and Google this. Oh, sorry, it's a little off. Whoop. So, have you been around for the last decade? There's this thing called avian flu. Although they like to say influenza to sound smarter. Bird flu. Bird flu. It was all over the news during COVID that bird flu was going crazy. They were killing millions and millions and millions of chickens. Look at this graph. The same time period this dude's describing, it went from almost no chickens killed from bird flu to almost every chicken. So guess what happens when the supply of chickens suddenly decreases by a lot? The price of the eggs the living ones continue to produce is going to increase by a lot. And guess what happens when chicken farmers who, they don't get paid this price, but just to simplify it, because wholesale is a lot less than retail, but let's say a chicken farmer's normal price is $1 a dozen. What do you think's going to happen when all of a sudden you can make $4.50 a dozen on eggs? Everybody and their brother who has chicken facilities is going to get more chickens, right? And then what happens? There's a glut of supply and the price crashes. Mystery solved. I'm a regular Scooby-Doo. Okay? This person's convinced that they understand that this must be corporate greed and no other reason. Now, I could make an argument here that government intervention made this one worse too. Maybe I should, because what I'm trying to say is that as my thesis is as we are exposed to greater complexity, the damage normal people can do increases by doing things that normal people do. And government folks are not the best and brightest. The best and brightest don't go into government. They start businesses or do something else that where they can be compensated for their greater contribution. Because you really don't get paid that much in the government. Even when you look at Congress, they make an astronomical amount a year. But if you're the quality of person that merits that office, you could make far more in the private sector with far less hassle. You see, it's people, exceptional people, they strongly prefer to be in situations where they're free to do what it is they're passionate about doing. They don't like being constrained by stupid rules that don't have anything to do with what matters. That's the opposite of government. And so the people who do go into government are either narcissists, psychopaths, or sociopaths, or a mix of all three, and or are corrupt, and they know that they can use their office to make tons of money illicitly, which they do. Okay, and this is why people that go into Congress end up coming out of Congress with a net worth 10 to 100 times what they went in with that can't be explained by their salary. This is why Nancy Pelosi is the most successful stock trader in the history of the world. If you look at her gains versus losses, because she insider traded her whole career, which is illegal for normal people to do, but legal for Congress to do. So, anyway, this is the problem, because people like the guy who wrote this comment vote. And they're not voting for people they think are better than them, which is what you're supposed to do in a representative democracy. Instead, they are molding the representative democracy into a direct democracy. And in a direct democracy, you vote for people who are just like you. You find the person who's most like you, and that's who you vote for. And that is why everything is as messed up as it is. There's a reduction of complexity into one simple reason for you. It's because people like this really think that they know what's going on to the extent that they're willing to dictate the actions of others. And therein lies the problem. If this person said, look, I've tried to study this out and I have a theory of why this is, and the first thing I'm going to do is apply it to my own life. And then I'll go from there. If it works out, then I'll scale up. Great. That's fantastic. That's exactly what you should do. But they're skipping over all the parts of their own life and jumping right into the life of other people. You know, this is like the college activists who go to protests that, you know, theoretically to get someone fired for what they think is a good reason, where they've never done anything meaningful in their entire lives, and everything before them they're abysmally failing at. So being an abysmal failure in your own circle of influence, you're deciding to spend your time and resources to try to dictate the behavior of other people. There's something wrong with this equation. Okay, final example, the rant of insurance, utilities, and rent. Starting on insurance, my car insurance went up 50%, and I drive thousands of miles less each year. How could this be? I'm driving less but paying more. How could this be? You know, cue the outrage. Let's make placards and go protest something. Well, again, it took approximately 2 seconds to Google this one. I guess you have to know what to look for. So what do you think? I'm just going to point to two things. It's a complex situation. There's probably 100 reasons for why that is. Why insurance rates are skyrocketing for car insurance. Here's two reasons that probably cover most of the pie chart, okay? One, a whole lot of people are getting electric cars. if an electric car is damaged, it's way more likely to be written off as a total loss. There are many reasons for that, and we could sort of dig through the fine print here. But one of the big reasons is that you can see what I Googled in the very first thing at the top of the page. One of the reasons is that they have this bank of batteries in their base, and almost any collision of any type is going to damage at least one of those batteries. And they basically have to take apart the car to get to the batteries. And they're so expensive to replace, sometimes they're an entire unit, that the car is a loss. And so they just pay out whatever the market value for the used car is. Well, guess what that's going to do to the payouts of the insurance company? And guess what happens when an insurance company that used to be paying out X per year is now paying out some multiple of X per year? They have to raise the rates. There's no choice. And you say, well, why don't they just raise the rates for electric cars? Well, now you get into another box of complexity, which includes the fact that all large companies get bonus points for how woke they are. And it's not very woke to charge people what they cost. In other words, for an insurance company to distribute the extra cost from electric vehicles over all vehicles is exactly what they do to maximize their ESV score. So, ESG, excuse me. So that's one possible explanation for that. But anyway, here's another thing that you're not gonna realize if you're just a rank and file person. And this is that, well, I'm sorry, there's three things I wanted to mention here. This is that used cars, this is actually something that most people probably do realize. The third one is one that you probably don't. Used car prices have gone through the roof because of COVID. And this is another supply and demand thing. The chip shortage, which was because of the government's reaction to COVID, caused a car shortage because new vehicles are covered in electronics, which incidentally was caused by the government pushing the limits of emissions, which required tons of computer equipment integrated into the engine. And so it's this, so people who couldn't buy new cars, they flooded the used car market. Well, again, they did all of this against a backdrop of people having way more cash because of all the stimulus, and not just the direct stimulus checks. PPP was a huge deal. Tons of money, okay? Tons and tons of money. So of course this is going to happen. So the Blue Book value of your car is the payout on a loss. So even if the same exact number of cars were totaled during the last few years as the prior years, the payouts from the insurance companies are going to be a whole lot more. And therefore, yes, your rates are going to increase. They have to. Okay? Without the insurance companies making any extra money, they would have to increase. Now, if you add on to that the fact that when inflation strikes, if your company can increase its prices, it's going to. Of course, it's going to do that. If you're a W-2 employee and you had the choice to give yourself a raise, wouldn't you do it? If the cost of living increased by 30% in a year, wouldn't you give yourself a raise? Even if you were the most just person on earth, that's pretty straightforward. If things cost 30% more, I should get paid 30% more because what I produce is now worth 30% more as well. This is why minimum wage doesn't work, by the way. And it actually hurts the people it's meant to help the most. However, there's a third reason with the insurance rates going through the roof for cars, and that is the insane rise of uninsured motorists. So it turns out that when you admit something like 10 million illegal immigrants into the country, you're going to get an enormous number of uninsured motorists who are now driving around without insurance, without driver's licenses. And when they crash into someone, those you have to pay out two claims on one insurance policy because the law-abiding citizen is going to have to file a claim on their policy, and that's where uninsured motorists coverage comes in. It's when you get into an accident with someone who doesn't have car insurance, which is against the law. And so the insurance company has to jack up rates because they're paying out two times what they used to. So if every accident were with an uninsured motorist, you would expect insurance rates to increase by 100%. But because only some accidents are with an uninsured motorist, it would be less than that, but still a lot. And so surprise, surprise, insurance rates go up 50%. It's a confluence of factors, but I've given you three huge ones. Okay, now I'm not going to go through these other things, but we could do this all day long. Now, if someone cannot explain with any degree of accuracy the cause of these effects, should they have any influence whatsoever on the decisions of other people? I'll leave that for you to think about, but I will terminate with this question. Is it a surprise that things are getting worse much faster as we are exposed to ever more complexity while humans get no better?